When my wife's mother pointed at me in front of the entire family and told me to apologize or leave, I smiled. Not because it was funny. Not because I wasn't hurt. I smiled because, in that exact moment, I finally understood something I had spent 11 years refusing to see. My wife was standing beside her mother. And she wasn't defending me. That was the moment my marriage ended. They just didn't know it yet. My name is Daniel Mercer, and for 11 years, I had done everything I could to become part of my wife's family. I fixed things around their house. I drove through the night when someone needed help. I attended every reunion, every birthday, every holiday dinner, even when I knew I would spend most of the evening feeling like an unwanted guest. I never demanded gratitude. I never asked them to praise me. I only wanted the basic respect you expect from people who call themselves family. Apparently, that was too much. Before I tell you what happened on that porch, you need to understand how quietly this whole thing started. Because family betrayal rarely begins with screaming. It begins with little things. A forgotten invitation. A joke that goes too far. A conversation that suddenly stops when you enter the room. And the worst part, you convince yourself each time that it means nothing. My wife, Lauren, had been talking about her family's annual lake reunion for weeks. "They're really excited you're coming this year," she told me during the drive. I glanced at her and smiled. "Are they?" She looked at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" Nothing. And that was my problem. For years, I had turned nothing into a lifestyle. The reunion was held at her parents' lake house in rural Tennessee, far enough from town that cell service disappeared in certain spots. It was beautiful. Quiet water. Tall trees. A huge wooden deck overlooking the lake. From the outside, it looked like the perfect family retreat. But I had learned something over the years. Beautiful places can hide ugly behavior. When we arrived Friday evening, Lauren's younger sister Mia ran toward us from the dock. "Daniel." She threw her arms around me before I could even put my bag down. Mia was the only person in that family who never made me feel like I had to earn my place. Behind her came the rest. Lauren's parents, Margaret and Thomas. Her older sister Rachel and Rachel's husband, Caleb. Her brother Ethan and his girlfriend, Nora. Then came cousins, uncles, aunts, and relatives whose names I had memorized simply because I knew I would be tested on them later. Margaret eventually walked over. She smiled. "Barely. Daniel. You made it. Wouldn't miss it." She touched my arm for less than a second. Then she turned to Lauren and started talking as if I wasn't standing there. I told myself it was nothing. That night, I believed myself. The next morning, I stopped believing. At breakfast, Margaret walked around the table filling everyone's coffee. Thomas, Rachel, Caleb, Ethan, Nora, Mia, Lauren. Then she walked straight past me. My cup remained empty. I stared at it for a moment. Then I quietly stood up, walked inside, and poured my own coffee. Nobody said anything. Not Margaret. Not Lauren. Nobody. And somehow, that silence hurt more than an insult. Because I suddenly wondered how many times I had mistaken being tolerated for being loved. I didn't know it yet, but that empty coffee cup was only the first warning. By Sunday afternoon, they would give me 2 choices. And I would choose a third. The only problem was they had no idea what that third choice would cost them. Saturday afternoon was when I finally understood that the coffee had never been about coffee. It was about where they believed I belonged. And apparently, after 11 years of marriage, I still belonged somewhere outside the circle. The men were gathered near the dock that afternoon when Lauren's father, Thomas, started talking about a drainage problem on the property. He looked at Caleb, then Ethan, then his nephew, Grant, who had somehow managed to turn being unemployed into a full-time occupation. "Anyone want to take a look at it later?" Thomas asked. I almost laughed. I knew that property better than most of them. Years earlier, I had spent an entire weekend fixing a serious leak beneath their house. So I stepped forward. "I can take a look, Thomas. I remember where the old drainage line runs." Thomas barely looked at me. "Caleb probably has it." That was it. No thank you. No explanation. Just a quiet dismissal. I looked at Caleb. He gave me an uncomfortable half-smile, almost apologizing without actually saying anything. I nodded. "Sure." Then I walked away. That was the last time I offered to help that family without being asked. But the real humiliation came that evening. Dinner was outside beneath strings of warm lights. The lake reflected the sunset, and for a few minutes, everything looked peaceful. Lauren was happy. That mattered to me. Even after everything, I still loved seeing her smile. She sat across from me, laughing with Rachel while Mia occasionally leaned toward me and whispered comments about everyone's behavior. Then Grant suddenly looked across the table. "So Daniel," he said loudly, "Lauren tells us your business is doing pretty well." I smiled politely. "It's doing fine. What exactly do you do again?" The table became strangely quiet. Grant knew. Everyone knew. I had spent years building a commercial property management company. We had grown from a tiny operation into a serious business with employees, contracts, and dozens of properties under management. Lauren had talked about it countless times, but Grant wasn't asking because he had forgotten. He was asking because he wanted everyone to hear my answer. "Property management," I said. Grant nodded. "Right. Property management." Then he smirked. "So basically you deal with buildings and maintenance stuff?" A few people laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Rachel covered her smile with her glass. Caleb stared down at his plate. I looked at Lauren. That was the moment I needed her. Just one sentence. One simple sentence telling them to stop. Instead, she kept cutting her food. She didn't even look at me. Something inside my chest tightened. I swallowed it. "Something like that," I said. Grant leaned back, satisfied, and the conversation moved on. But mine didn't. I sat there listening to everyone talk, while a strange realization slowly settled over me. I had spent years trying to prove I was good enough for these people, and they had spent years making sure I never forgot that they didn't think I was. Later that night, Mia found me alone near the edge of the lake. "You okay?" I looked at her. "Yeah." She frowned. "You always say that when you're definitely not okay." I almost smiled. "You're getting better at reading me." She sat beside me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said, "They were being awful tonight." I stared at the water. "Which part?" "All of it." I finally turned toward her. "Mia, why does your family treat me like this?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me more than her answer ever could. "Daniel." "What?" She looked down. "Maybe you should talk to Lauren." "I've tried." "Try again." I wanted to tell her that I had been trying for 11 years. But I didn't. Instead, I looked across the lake toward the house where my wife was laughing with the same people who had just humiliated me. And for the first time, I wondered whether Lauren had been quietly choosing them over me for years. The next morning, I got my answer. After lunch, Rachel approached me near the storage shed. "Daniel, can we talk?" I immediately knew this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was firm. And behind her eyes was something I recognized. She had already decided what I was guilty of. I followed her away from everyone else. She stopped. "I'm going to be honest with you." I almost laughed. Because whenever someone starts a conversation that way, honesty is usually the last thing you're about to receive. Rachel took a breath. "Lauren isn't happy." I stared at her. "What?" "She's been unhappy for a long time." My stomach dropped. Not because I believed Rachel. Because some part of me already knew this conversation was coming. Rachel continued. "She says you're always working. You don't make enough effort with her family, and my parents feel like you don't respect them." I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood there while 11 years of marriage were reduced to a list of accusations delivered by my wife's sister. Then Rachel said something that changed everything. "She thinks this marriage might not survive if you don't change." For the first time all weekend, I felt something colder than anger. Fear. Not fear of losing the marriage. Fear that I had already lost it. I thanked Rachel for telling me. Then I walked toward the lake. Lauren was standing there alone. I sat beside her. Rachel talked to me. Lauren didn't look at me. I know. Those two words hit harder than anything Rachel had said. I stared at her profile. "You knew she was coming to confront me?" Lauren remained silent. "Lauren." Finally, she looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I had never seen before. Not anger. Not sadness. Distance. Like she had already stepped away from our marriage and was simply waiting for me to notice. Then she whispered, "Maybe they're right, Daniel." My heart sank, because I knew what was coming next. And I had no idea that within hours, my wife would stand silently while her entire family decided whether I deserved to stay married to her. "Maybe they're right, Daniel." Lauren said it quietly, almost too quietly, but somehow, those 4 words were louder than everything her family had said to me all weekend. I looked at her. "About what?" She kept her eyes on the lake. "About you." I waited. She sighed. "You work constantly. You're always thinking about the company. Even when you're here, you're somewhere else." I felt something crack inside me. Lauren, I built that company because we needed a future. I know. Do you? She finally looked at me, and I saw no anger in her face. That made it worse. She looked tired, like she had been preparing herself for this conversation long before I knew it was coming. My family thinks you don't care about us, she said. Your family thinks I don't care because I don't let them walk over me. That's not fair. I almost laughed. Fair? She frowned. I pointed toward the house. Your mother ignored me at breakfast. Your brother dismissed me in front of everyone. Your sister just told me you've been unhappy for a long time. And last night your cousin mocked the company I spent years building. Lauren's face tightened. They were joking. No. I shook my head. They weren't. She looked away. That silence told me everything. Lauren, did you agree with them? She didn't answer. Just tell me the truth. After several seconds, she whispered, sometimes. My throat tightened. I looked at the woman I had loved for 11 years, and suddenly felt like I was meeting a stranger. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want another argument. So you let them have it instead? Her eyes filled with tears. That isn't what happened. Then what happened? She had no answer. I stared at the water. There are moments in marriage when you can feel the relationship changing. Not ending. Not yet. Just changing. The warmth disappears. The certainty disappears. And suddenly, you're sitting beside someone you've shared 11 years with, wondering whether they would choose you if someone forced them to. I already knew the answer. Lauren stood. Maybe you should try harder with my family. I looked up at her. After 11 years? She swallowed. Just try. I have. She turned away. Not enough. That sentence stayed with me, because I suddenly realized something painful. Nothing I did would ever be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't one of them. About an hour later, I went inside the guest room. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I needed to understand how my marriage had reached a point where my wife's family could criticize me in front of her, and she could still tell me to try harder. Then I heard voices outside. Several voices. Too many. I stepped into the hallway. The living room was empty. But when I walked toward the back porch, I saw them. Everyone was gathered there. Lauren. Her parents. Her siblings. The cousins. The aunts and uncles. Even people who had barely spoken to me all weekend were standing together. I counted them. 34 people. 34. For one strange second, I wondered why they needed an audience. Then Margaret stepped forward. She was holding a glass of iced tea. Her face was calm. Almost rehearsed. Daniel, we need to clear the air. I looked at Lauren. She was standing beside her mother. Our eyes met. I waited for her to move. She didn't. That was when the fear inside me disappeared. Margaret began talking about respect. About family. About how they had tried to welcome me. Thomas nodded beside her. Rachel added comments whenever she thought her mother needed support. Someone mentioned my work. Someone else mentioned how distant I supposedly was. I stood there listening. Every accusation felt like another brick being placed on a wall between me and my wife. Then Margaret stepped closer. Daniel, we have tried for years. I almost interrupted, but I didn't. She continued. You've made it clear that you don't want to be part of this family. I looked around. The irony almost hurt more than the accusation. You've been given every opportunity, she said. I glanced at Lauren. Still nothing. Margaret took a breath. Then she delivered the sentence that would change the rest of my life. I think you have two choices. The entire porch went silent. You can apologize sincerely to this family and promise to change. She pointed toward the driveway. Or you can leave. I looked at her finger. Then at Lauren. Then at the 34 people waiting for me to beg. For 11 years, I had been the man who swallowed his pride. The man who fixed their problems. The man who showed up. The man who kept the peace. But something inside me had finally become quiet. I smiled. Not an angry smile. Not a cruel one. A calm smile. Margaret's expression changed. Thank you, I said. She blinked. For what? For finally making things clear. I turned around. And I walked inside. Behind me, I heard Lauren say my name. But I didn't stop. Because I had just been given two choices. And for the first time in 11 years, I wasn't going to choose either one. What they didn't know was that I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to defend myself. I was going to make one phone call. And before that weekend was over, that phone call would turn their little family ultimatum into the beginning of something none of them could undo. I walked into the guest room and closed the door behind me. For a few seconds, I just stood there. I could still hear voices outside. 34 people. 34 witnesses to the moment my wife chose silence while her family told me I didn't belong. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They were shaking. That surprised me. I had expected anger. Instead, I felt grief. Deep, exhausting grief. Because no matter how badly her family had treated me, Lauren was the person I had expected to stand beside me. She didn't. I reached for my phone. I opened my airline app. My hands stopped shaking. There was a flight leaving Nashville in a little over 2 hours. Destination, Chicago. I stared at the screen. Then I selected the flight. One way. My thumb hovered over the confirmation button. For 11 years, I had asked myself how much I could tolerate to keep my marriage together. That afternoon, I asked a different question. How much of myself was I willing to lose just to stay? I pressed confirm. 3 taps. That was all it took to book a one-way ticket out of the life I had spent 11 years protecting. I started packing. No dramatic throwing of clothes. No slamming drawers. Just folded shirts. Charged my laptop. Packed my toiletries. Put my watch in the side pocket of my bag. The calmness frightened me. It felt like my heart had already made the decision, and my mind was simply catching up. Then someone knocked. The door opened before I answered. Mia stood there. Her eyes were already red. Daniel. I looked at her. What? She stared at the suitcase. What are you doing? Leaving. Her face collapsed. No. Come on. Don't do this. I zipped the bag. They told me to leave. You know they didn't mean it like that. I stopped. Mia, they stood me in front of 34 people and gave me 2 choices. She didn't answer. Apologize or leave. I know. And Lauren stood there. Mia's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to do. I looked at her. She knew exactly what to do. That hurt Mia. I could see it. But I couldn't take the words back. She stepped closer. Please talk to her before you go. I looked toward the hallway. Is she coming? Mia hesitated. That was my answer. I closed my suitcase. Mia suddenly wrapped her arms around me. I froze for half a second. Then I hugged her back. She held on tightly. The kind of hug that says everything someone is too afraid to say. I'm sorry, she whispered. I closed my eyes. You didn't do anything. I should have said something. Yes. She pulled away and looked at me. I wasn't angry with her. That was important. But I wasn't going to lie either. You should have. Her lips trembled. Are you really leaving? I nodded. Where will you go? Chicago. Why? I looked at the suitcase. Because I need somewhere I can hear myself think. Mia wiped her cheek. Does Lauren know? I shook my head. Tell her yourself. I will. I picked up my bag. Then I stopped. Mia? Yeah. You're the only person in this family who ever made me feel like I belonged. She started crying again. I pulled her into another hug. Then I walked out. The family was still gathered on the porch. The conversation stopped the second they saw my suitcase. Margaret's eyebrows lifted. Daniel, where are you going? I smiled. You gave me 2 choices. Thomas stood. Come on, Daniel. Let's not make this bigger than it is. I looked at him. You already made it exactly as big as it needed to be. Rachel stepped forward. This is ridiculous. No, I said calmly. What's ridiculous is believing I would stand there and apologize for things I didn't do. Then I looked at Lauren. Everything around me disappeared. For 11 years, that woman had been my home. I remembered our first apartment. Our first Christmas together. The night she cried in my arms when her father was sick. The mornings we drank coffee together before work. The ordinary moments. The moments nobody else knew about. I loved her. God, I still loved her. That was the hardest part. But love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes love is realizing the person you would have fought the world for has already decided not to fight for you. Lauren. She looked at me. Her face had gone pale. Daniel, wait. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to. But then I remembered her sitting at that dinner table while her family laughed at me. I remembered the lake. Maybe they're right. And finally, the porch. Apologize or leave. I nodded once. Take care of yourself. Her eyes widened. Daniel, where are you going? I didn't answer. I put the suitcase in my car. Then I drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not because I was trying to make some dramatic statement. I simply didn't need to. My phone started vibrating before I reached the highway. Lauren. I ignored it. A few minutes later, she called again. Then Rachel. Then Margaret. Then Lauren again. My phone kept lighting up beside me. I turned it face down. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to solve someone else's problem. I was finally dealing with my own. The drive to Nashville took less than an hour. The entire way, I heard Lauren's voice in my head. Maybe they're right. Maybe you should try harder. You're not doing enough. And beneath every sentence was the question I couldn't escape. If I went back, what exactly would I be returning to? At a red light, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Lauren. Daniel, please. Just tell me where you're going. I stared at those words. Then another message appeared. We need to talk. I almost replied. Almost. But instead I put the phone back down. Because I knew something Lauren didn't. I wasn't going back to the lake house. I wasn't going back to that marriage the same way. And by the time my plane landed, I was going to make a phone call that would reveal just how prepared I had been for the possibility that this day might eventually come. A call to the one person who could tell me exactly what I stood to lose, and what I could finally keep. By the time I reached the airport, Lauren had called me 6 times. I didn't answer. Not because I hated her. That would have been easier. I didn't answer because I knew that if I heard her voice, I might remember every reason I had stayed for 11 years. And I was afraid that love would make me weak again. I parked my car in long-term parking, took my suitcase inside, and sat at the gate. For the first time in years, nobody was asking me to fix anything. Nobody needed a ride. Nobody needed money. Nobody needed me to smooth over an argument. There was just silence. And strangely, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like relief. I bought a drink and sat alone near the window. My phone buzzed again. Lauren. Then Margaret. Then Lauren. Finally, a message appeared. Please come back. We can talk about this. I read it twice. Then I locked the screen. Talk about what? The humiliation? The 11 years of disrespect? The fact that my wife had watched her family corner me and never once said, stop. Some conversations come too late. My flight was called. I boarded. During the flight, I didn't listen to music. I didn't watch anything. I just stared out the window. When the plane landed in Chicago, I collected my bag and headed straight to my office. I had a small private suite connected to the building. I sometimes stayed there when work ran late. That night, it didn't feel like an office. It felt like the first place I could breathe. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at my desk. Then I picked up my phone. There was one person I needed to call. My attorney. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. Rebecca had handled my company's contracts for years. She was calm, precise, and almost impossible to intimidate. She answered quickly. Daniel. Rebecca, I need to talk. There was a pause. What happened? I left. Left where? Lauren. Silence. Rebecca knew me well enough not to start giving advice before hearing the facts. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the reunion. The insults. The conversation with Rachel. Lauren's silence. The porch. The ultimatum. And finally the suitcase. Rebecca didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked one question. Are you planning to go back? I stared through the office window. No. Are you sure? That question hurt more than I expected. I closed my eyes. No, I said. I'm not sure I can survive going back. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then her voice softened. Then we need to discuss your position before you make any decisions. That sentence caught my attention. My position? Yes. She began asking questions about the company. Ownership. Accounts. Contracts. Property. Personal finances. Business structures. And as I answered, something became clear. Lauren didn't know everything about my business. Neither did her family. And that wasn't because I had been secretly planning revenge. It was because I had learned years earlier that building something valuable meant protecting it. About a year before the reunion, I had reorganized the company after a difficult conversation with Lauren about our finances. The business was legally structured under my ownership. Our personal finances were separate from the company. There were joint assets, of course. A house, savings, other things we had built together. But the company itself was something I had built long before Lauren's family started treating it like a hobby. Rebecca asked me to send her several documents. I did. Then she said something that made me sit up straight. Daniel, you're in a stronger position than you realize. I stared at the phone. What does that mean? It means you don't need to panic. I almost laughed. I'm not panicking. Good. Then don't start now. She explained what the next steps would look like if I decided to move forward with a separation and eventual divorce. I listened. I took notes. And for the first time that weekend, I felt something other than pain. Control. Not revenge. Not yet. Just control over my own life. I didn't sleep much that night, but when morning came, I was at my desk before 7. By 9, I had handled client calls. By 10, I had reviewed a major contract. The strange thing was that the world hadn't ended. I had spent years believing that if I stopped carrying everyone else's problems, everything would collapse. Instead, I discovered that the only thing collapsing was the version of my life I had been forcing myself to maintain. Monday afternoon, Rebecca called again. Have you decided? I looked at the city through my office window. Yes. Then we moved carefully. I knew what that meant. No angry messages. No social media posts. No threats. No dramatic confrontation. Just paperwork. Documentation. Facts. Silence. That was when I realized something important. Margaret had expected me to come crawling back. Lauren had expected me to cool down. Rachel probably expected an apology. They were all waiting for the old Daniel, the man who would eventually surrender just to restore peace. But that man was gone. Tuesday morning, Rebecca began preparing the documents. And I said nothing to Lauren. Not one word. By Wednesday, the first papers were ready. By Thursday, they would reach her. But I wasn't going to deliver them myself. I wanted her to experience something I had experienced for years. The shock of discovering that the person you thought would always stay had finally stopped waiting for you. Thursday morning, I was sitting in my office when my phone started vibrating repeatedly. Lauren. Again. 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 I ignored the first few calls. Then I saw the number of missed calls climb. 5, 8, 10, then 12. Something was wrong. I finally answered. Lauren. Her breathing was shaky. Daniel. I said nothing. What did you do? My stomach tightened. Why are you asking me that? Because someone just came to my mother's house. I leaned back in my chair. Who? She started crying. And then she said the words that told me the waiting was over. Daniel, they served me papers. I closed my eyes. For 11 years, I had tried to save our marriage. Now Lauren finally understood that I wasn't trying to save it anymore. Please, she whispered. Tell me you didn't do this because of one stupid weekend. I looked at the documents on my desk. Then I remembered the porch. 34 people. 2 choices. And my wife's silence. No, Lauren, I said quietly. This didn't happen because of one weekend. There was a long silence. Then I heard her voice break. Then why? I took a breath. Because that weekend was just the first time you finally said out loud what I had already been feeling for years. Lauren began to sob. And for the first time since I left, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Are you really leaving me? I stared at the papers. No. She stopped crying. What? I swallowed. I'm not leaving you. My voice became quieter. You already left me. And when I ended that call, I knew the hardest part wasn't over. Because Lauren wasn't the only person who was about to find out what I had decided. Her mother was next. And Margaret was about to learn that the man she had ordered off her porch had stopped asking for permission to walk away. After I ended the call with Lauren, I sat alone in my office for several minutes. I didn't feel victorious. That surprised me. People imagine revenge as a rush of satisfaction. They imagine the person walking away smiling, while everyone who hurt them finally suffers. But real betrayal doesn't feel like that. It feels like mourning someone who is still alive. I had just told my wife that she had already left me. And the truth was, saying those words hurt me more than any insult her family had thrown at me. Because I still remembered the woman Lauren used to be. The woman who would fall asleep against my shoulder during long drives. The woman who once told me that she didn't care how much money I made, because she only wanted a peaceful life with me. Somewhere along the way, that woman disappeared. Or maybe I had simply stopped seeing who she had become. My phone rang again. This time it was Margaret. I watched her name appear on the screen. I let it ring. She called again. I ignored her. Then came a text. Daniel, we need to speak immediately. I stared at it. I almost replied. Instead, I put the phone down. I had spent 11 years responding immediately whenever someone in that family needed something. For once, they could wait. That afternoon, Rebecca called. Margaret contacted me. I leaned back. Already? She wants to know what you're planning. I almost smiled. Tell her nothing. Rebecca paused. That's exactly what I told her. I trusted Rebecca because she understood something my wife's family never had. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes silence is the only way to prevent someone from twisting your words. The next few days became strangely ordinary. I worked. I answered clients. I reviewed contracts. I went home to my apartment and cooked simple meals. And every night Lauren called. Sometimes she was angry. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she promised things. "We can fix this, Daniel. I'll talk to my mother. Please come home." I didn't realize how serious this was. That last sentence hurt. Because I wanted to ask her something. How could you live beside me for 11 years and not realize? How many times did I have to swallow my hurt before it became visible? But I didn't ask. One evening, Lauren called again. This time, her voice was different. "Daniel, my mother says you planned this." I frowned. "Planned what?" "The divorce." I closed my eyes. "No. But she says you've been preparing for months." I looked around my office. The truth was more complicated. I had prepared financially. I had protected the company. I had kept records of important business decisions. But I hadn't planned to leave Lauren. Not then. I had simply noticed that something was wrong and made sure I wouldn't be destroyed if it got worse. "Lauren," I said, "there's a difference between preparing for uncertainty and secretly planning to destroy your marriage." She was quiet. Then she asked, "Did you ever love me?" That question nearly broke me. I stood up and walked toward the window. "That's not fair. Answer me." I stared down at the street. "Yes." Her breathing changed. "Do you still?" I didn't answer immediately. Because the honest answer wasn't simple. "I don't know what love looks like after what happened." She started crying. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to comfort her. The old instinct was still there. But I had spent years comforting everyone else while nobody noticed I was breaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I looked at the ceiling. "Lauren, I'm not asking you to apologize anymore." "Then what do you want?" That question stopped me. What did I want? For years, I thought I wanted her family to accept me. Then I thought I wanted Lauren to defend me. Then I thought I wanted an apology. But none of those things mattered anymore. "I want peace," I finally said. She didn't respond. "I want to wake up without wondering whether I'm going to be insulted by people I'm supposed to call family." "Daniel, I want to stop feeling like I have to earn my place in my own marriage." Her voice broke. "You never had to earn it." I almost laughed. Then why did I spend 11 years trying? Silence. That silence was the answer. The divorce proceedings continued. Lauren's attorney tried to challenge several aspects of the business structure. Rebecca was ready. She had documentation, contracts, ownership records, financial history. Everything was organized. Not because I had wanted to punish Lauren. Because I had always protected what I built. And now that protection mattered. Meanwhile, the family started telling their version of the story. According to Margaret, I had abandoned Lauren over a disagreement. According to Rachel, I had been unhappy for years and was looking for an excuse. According to Grant, I was apparently having some kind of midlife crisis. I heard all of this through Mia. One evening, she called me. "Daniel, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For what they're saying." I sat quietly. Then she said something that made me realize she had finally understood. "They keep saying you blindsided Lauren." I looked down at my desk. "Did I?" Mia hesitated. "No." "Then what happened?" She took a breath. "You finally stopped warning them." That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. Lauren had 11 years of warnings. She had seen every uncomfortable dinner. Every insult I swallowed. Every time I came home quiet. Every time I told her I didn't feel welcome. She had watched. She had heard. She had done nothing. Now she was shocked that I had finally acted. A few months passed. The anger slowly faded. The pain didn't disappear, but it became quieter. Then one morning Rebecca called me. "Daniel, we have a mediation date." I looked at my calendar. "When?" "Next month." I sighed. "Okay." Rebecca's voice became serious. "There's something you should know." "What?" "Lauren's attorney may make one final attempt to claim part of the company's growth." I stared at my office wall. For the first time in months, I felt the old anger returning. Not because of the money. Because of what it represented. The company was the one thing I had built entirely with my own hands. And now, after 11 years of being told I wasn't good enough, they wanted a piece of what I had built. I looked at Rebecca. "Let them try." She laughed softly. "That's exactly what I thought you'd say." But I didn't know yet that the mediation wouldn't be the final confrontation. Because someone else was about to contact me. Someone I hadn't expected. And when I saw his name on my phone, I knew the past I had walked away from was finally coming back to my door. Caleb, the man who had stood on that porch and watched them humiliate me. And this time, he wasn't calling to defend Lauren. He was calling because he was afraid. Afraid of what Margaret had done. And afraid that the family secret he had kept quiet about for years was finally about to come out. I stared at Caleb's name on my phone. For several seconds, I considered letting it go to voicemail. He had been there that Sunday. He had watched Margaret corner me. He had watched Rachel pile on. He had watched Lauren stand beside them while I was told to apologize or leave. And he had said nothing. That silence mattered. Maybe more than anything he could say now. The phone stopped ringing. Then it rang again. I answered. Caleb? There was a long pause. Daniel. His voice sounded different. Not confident. Not casual. Nervous. What do you want? I need to talk to you. About what? About the reunion. I leaned back in my chair. That was months ago. I know. Then why are you calling me now? Another pause. Because I should have said something that day. I closed my eyes. There it was. The apology I had expected when it could have actually mattered. Caleb, you were standing 10 feet away. I know. You heard everything. I know. And you didn't say a word. His voice dropped. I was afraid. That answer surprised me. Afraid of what? My wife. Your mother-in-law. The whole family. I almost laughed. You were afraid of them? Yes. His honesty took some of the anger out of me. Not all of it, but some. Caleb continued. You don't understand what it's like inside that family, Daniel. I looked out the window. I understand more than you think. No, you don't. His voice became more serious. They've been doing this to people for years. They decide who belongs, who doesn't, who's successful, who's a disappointment. And once they decide something about you, everyone is expected to agree. I stayed silent. Your problem, he continued, was that you never agreed with them. I rubbed my forehead. That doesn't explain why you stood there. No. His voice cracked slightly. It doesn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Caleb said something I hadn't expected. Lauren knew it was coming. My entire body went still. What? The confrontation. I sat forward. What are you saying? Your wife knew her mother wanted to confront you that afternoon. I stared at the desk. I already knew Lauren knew. No, Daniel. I mean she knew before you talked to Rachel. I felt my jaw tighten. How long before? I don't know exactly. Caleb. He exhaled. Since breakfast. I closed my eyes. That hurt. Even after everything, that detail still hurt. Lauren had known. She had watched the pieces being assembled. And she never warned me. I whispered. Why are you telling me this now? Because I watched what happened to you, and then I watched everyone rewrite it afterward. I said nothing. They tell people you just walked out. They don't mention why. Of course they don't. They say you abandoned Lauren. I looked toward the window. Did I? No. His answer came immediately. You didn't. That was the first thing Caleb had said that actually mattered. Then he continued. You gave them exactly what they asked for. I looked down. They told you to leave. And you left. Yes. There was another pause. Then Caleb said, I should have stopped it. I swallowed. Maybe. Daniel. Caleb, I'm not angry anymore. He went quiet. I continued. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. I understand. No, you don't. I leaned back. You were there. You know what happened. But you don't know what it felt like to look at your wife and realize she wasn't going to stand beside you. Caleb didn't answer. I could hear his breathing. Finally, he said, You're right. For once, I didn't need him to say anything else. The conversation ended shortly afterward. But it stayed in my mind. Not because of Caleb. Because of Lauren. I thought about the lake. Her telling me to try harder. Her saying maybe her family was right. Her standing beside Margaret on that porch. And now I knew she had known the confrontation was coming. That night Lauren called. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Hello. She was silent. Then she said, Caleb talked to you. It wasn't a question. Yes. What did he tell you? That you knew. Silence. Lauren. I didn't know what my mother was going to say. You knew she was going to confront me. I knew she wanted to talk. That's not what I asked. Her breathing became shaky. Yes. One word. It landed harder than I expected. I stared at the floor. Why didn't you warn me? I thought maybe it would help. Help what? Help you understand. I laughed once. There was no humor in it. You needed 34 people to help me understand? Daniel, please. No. My voice remained calm. You don't get to ask me for another chance while avoiding the truth. I was scared. That stopped me. Of me? No. She began crying. Of losing everyone. I closed my eyes. And suddenly I understood. Lauren hadn't chosen her family because she loved them more. She had chosen them because she was afraid of what would happen if she didn't. But that didn't make it hurt less. Lauren, I said quietly, you were afraid of losing your family. She didn't answer. I was afraid of losing my wife. Her crying became louder. And I did. Daniel, you didn't lose me when I left that lake house. I swallowed hard. You lost me when you watched me stand alone. Silence. I ended the call. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just finished. Months later, the divorce finally reached mediation. I walked into the room carrying one folder. Rebecca carried 3. Lauren was already there with her attorney. When she saw me, her face changed. For 1 second, I saw the woman I remembered. Then it disappeared. We sat across from each other. The mediator began discussing the remaining assets. The house, savings, investments, and finally the company. Lauren's attorney argued that the business had grown during the marriage and that Lauren deserved consideration for that growth. Rebecca opened her folder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply placed document after document on the table. Ownership records, financial statements, business agreements, dates, contracts, everything. Lauren watched. Her attorney read. Then read again. Finally, he leaned toward her and whispered something. Lauren looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply sat there. Because this wasn't revenge. This was the consequence of spending years protecting something, while everyone around you assumed your patience meant you had nothing to protect. The mediator eventually moved on. The company remained mine. The house became the difficult part. By the end of the session, Lauren looked exhausted. She turned toward me. Daniel. I looked at her. Do you ever think about us? That question hit me unexpectedly. I looked down at my hands. Yes. Her eyes filled with tears. Do you miss me? I took a long breath. Sometimes. She nodded slowly. Then why won't you come back? I looked directly into her eyes. Because missing someone isn't the same as trusting them. She looked away. And that was the moment I knew our marriage was truly over. Not because the paperwork said so. Not because lawyers were sitting around a table. But because I finally understood that love could survive distance, anger, even disappointment. Trust was different. And once trust was broken in front of 34 people, no apology could make me forget what I had seen. The divorce wasn't finished yet. But my life was already changing. I bought a place of my own. I started taking weekends away from work. My company continued growing. And for the first time in years, I woke up without wondering who I needed to please. Then 18 months after that reunion, I walked into a professional event in Nashville. There were hundreds of people in the room. I was talking to a few business owners when I saw someone near the bar. Caleb. He saw me too. His expression changed immediately. He slowly walked toward me. And before he said a word, I knew exactly what this conversation was going to be about. Because Caleb wasn't looking at me like a former brother-in-law. He was looking at me like a man who finally understood what his silence had cost. And this time, I wasn't the man standing on the outside of the family. I was the man who had built an entirely new life without them. But Caleb still had one thing to say. And hearing it would finally close the door I had left open for far too long. Caleb stood across from me at the rooftop reception, holding his drink with both hands. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You look well." I nodded. "I am." He looked down at his glass. "I wanted to tell you something." I waited. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words were simple. But they carried the weight of 18 months. I studied his face. He looked genuinely ashamed. "I didn't agree with what happened at the lake house," he said. "I never did." I nodded slowly. "But you were there." "I know. You watched it happen." "I know. And you said nothing." His eyes dropped. I was afraid. I believed him. That didn't erase what happened. I could have accepted his apology. I could have shaken his hand. I could have told him that everything was fine. That was what the old Daniel would have done. The old Daniel would have made everyone comfortable, even if it meant making himself uncomfortable. But I wasn't that man anymore. "I appreciate you saying it," I told him. Caleb looked relieved. Then I continued. "But I need you to understand something. His expression changed. An apology after everything is over is different from courage when it actually matters. He nodded. I know. I looked toward the city lights. You could have said one sentence that day. I should have. Yes. He swallowed. I'm sorry. I believe you. And I meant it. Then I picked up my drink. Have a good evening, Caleb. I walked away. I didn't hate him. I didn't need him to suffer. I didn't even need him to regret what happened. That was the strangest part of healing. Eventually, you stop needing the people who hurt you to understand your pain. You understand it yourself. The divorce had been finalized months earlier. Lauren and I had divided the things we had built together. The house, the savings, the ordinary pieces of a life that once felt permanent. The company stayed with me. Not because I had outsmarted her. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because it was mine. I had built it. I had protected it. And now I was finally protecting something else. My peace. 14 months after the reunion, my company had expanded. I hired an operations director. I promoted people who had earned it. I started taking weekends off. That sounds ordinary. But to me it felt enormous. For years, I had lived like the world would collapse if I stopped working for one day. Then I discovered something. The world didn't collapse. I did not need to spend every weekend fixing somebody else's problems. I didn't need to drive across town because someone had forgotten something. I didn't need to sit at a family dinner while people made jokes at my expense. I didn't need to explain my worth. I bought a small downtown condo. Clean. Quiet. Mine. The first Sunday morning there, I made coffee and stood beside the window. I remembered that empty cup at Lauren's parents' lake house. I remembered pouring my own coffee while everyone else pretended not to notice. At the time, it had seemed like such a small thing. Now I understood. The coffee wasn't the betrayal. It was the symbol. For years, I had been pouring my own cup while convincing myself I was still part of the family. I wasn't. I just hadn't been willing to admit it. Sometimes I still thought about Lauren. Of course I did. 11 years don't disappear because a marriage ends. There were memories I couldn't erase even if I wanted to. Our first apartment. Our vacations. The nights we stayed awake talking about the future. The ordinary mornings. The little jokes nobody else understood. I didn't hate those memories. I was grateful for them. But I finally understood something painful. A good memory doesn't obligate you to return to a bad situation. And love doesn't require you to keep accepting disrespect. That's the lesson I wish I had learned sooner. Because my revenge wasn't the divorce. It wasn't the company. It wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't watching Lauren's family realize they had misjudged me. The revenge was quieter. It was waking up every morning and choosing myself. It was building a life they couldn't control. It was refusing to return simply because they expected me to. Margaret had given me two choices that Sunday. Apologize or leave. She believed leaving meant losing. She thought if I walked out that door, I would eventually come crawling back. Lauren thought time would soften me. Rachel thought I would eventually regret my decision. Maybe even Caleb thought I would forgive everyone and return to being the man who kept the peace. They were all wrong. Because I didn't choose either of Margaret's options. I chose the third. I didn't apologize for things I hadn't done. And I didn't leave just to make a dramatic statement. I walked away because I finally understood that I didn't have to remain somewhere I was constantly being asked to prove that I deserved to be there. That was the third option. Not revenge. Not hatred. Freedom. And sometimes on quiet mornings I think about that porch. 34 people standing there. My wife on the wrong side of the room. Margaret pointing toward the driveway. Apologize or leave. For years, I thought the most painful part was hearing those words. I was wrong. The most painful part was looking at Lauren and realizing she wasn't going to stop them. That was the moment everything changed. Not when I booked the flight. Not when I called Rebecca. Not when the divorce papers were served. Right there. On that porch, when I finally understood that I had spent 11 years trying to be accepted by people who had already decided I wasn't family. And once I stopped chasing their acceptance, something unexpected happened. I found my own. I stopped measuring my worth by how people treated me. I stopped begging for seats at tables where I was only tolerated. I stopped confusing silence with peace. And I stopped looking backward. That's what nobody tells you about walking away. It isn't always loud. There may be no screaming, no dramatic confrontation, no moment where everyone suddenly realizes they were wrong. Sometimes it's just a man packing a suitcase, a one-way ticket, a phone placed face down on the passenger seat, A quiet conversation with an attorney. A final signature. And then one morning, you wake up and realize you're no longer waiting for anyone to change. You're free. My in-laws spent years making me feel invisible. They thought they had finally made me leave. But they misunderstood what happened. I didn't leave because they told me to. I left because I finally stopped asking them to let me stay. And that was the real revenge. Not destroying them. Not humiliating them. Not taking something that belonged to them. Simply becoming someone who no longer needed anything from them. They gave me two choices. I took the third. And the third choice wasn't walking away. It was never looking back. That was the moment they lost the version of me they had taken for granted for 11 years. And the moment I finally got my life back.